Welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the law firm Abercrombie and Sanchez, PLLC. You can find us on the internet at astxlegal.com or by calling 1-888-981-7509. Your hosts are Bryan Abercrombie and Sanchez. Bryan has been practicing law for 18 years and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in the area of family law. Sam has been practicing for 13 years, is licensed in both Texas and Florida, and is a certified mediator. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and all views are the opinion of the hosts. It's not designed to provide legal advice for your particular legal matter, and it should not replace the advice of competent counsel. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. I am your host, Bryan Abercrombie, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, the greatness of our law firm, Ssanchez. Sam, how you doing?
Not too bad. I'm the Oreos to your milk, right?
Yeah, well, you are the Butch Cassidy to my Sundance Kid, right?
There you go. I like it.
A reference. I don't know if that's a good reference or a bad reference, but I did like Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid. Or the Doc Holliday to my Wyatt Earp.
Hey, yeah, you're definitely Wyatt Earp in that scenario.
Well, anyway, we got a big show today because we are talking about some extremely controversial issues. We're going to talk about the new Texas abortion law, the what's everyone's calling the heartbeat law, and we're also going to talk about the latest and greatest of the, I guess, for lack of a better word, government-mandated vaccine requests. So I know those are highly controversial topics. We're not here to give out medical advice. Just want to preface that by saying we're not giving out medical advice or advocating a particular political position, even though we both have them on these issues. But we are going to be talking about it, and you know, a robust debate is always good, and when we're talking about difficult issues. So without further ado, let's talk about first our I guess for celebrity news for the week.
Celebrity corner, man. So let's start off with our girl Brittany. Obviously, we did a couple of podcasts talking about guardianships and what's been going on with her. Her case was kind of, at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and so it turns out like there have been some pretty major turns in her case. Most of the largest probably is that her father has decided to step out from that trustee role, which we know is extremely powerful and extremely cumbersome. And I think he's learned that a difficult lesson, right? Public opinion, obviously, when you're talking about stars, can swing things a lot of different ways, but even just normal everyday people, you and I both know that is a tough role to be in.
Absolutely, especially as a dad, number one, and then also as a dad who's a caretaker, and obviously we don't know all the ins and outs of there's a lot in that court case that's hidden from public view. So we don't know everything.
But not much of her, not much of Brittany's hidden from public view, but yeah, not
anymore. Not anymore if you look at Instagram. But it does. The interesting thing about that case, I think, in my opinion, is that it represents a significant impact on a person's life. Was she so bad? Was her medical condition so bad that it required someone to take full control over her person and her estate, to the point where she can't even remove a birth control device on her own without the guardian's consent? I don't know the answer to that question. Obviously, I've never seen the mental health reports or anything like that. I know she had some massive problems that were highly publicized, but is this a question of government overreach, or overreach of the state, or overreach of a guardian or of an individual over another individual, or is it, was it completely necessary? I guess time's going to tell on that, I guess.
Yeah, it's always a difficult choice, especially when somebody voluntarily submits to something like that. At one point, people around her, plus she, felt like it was a good idea, and now she wants out of it. So I guess we're going to see. Time will tell.
Yes. So let's get into the meat and potatoes topics of today. So I'm not sure which one you want to tackle first. You want to tackle the new Texas heartbeat law, or do you want to tackle the vaccine mandate?
Yeah, to quote a very famous line, law don't go around here, law dog. So let's start with the heartbeat law.
Okay, the heartbeat law. Well, as many of you know, the Texas heartbeat law went into effect on September the 1st, which basically makes it a crime. Well, not really a crime, but it makes it's basically against the law at this point to have an abortion after 6 weeks or when a fetal heartbeat is detected on a baby. So inside the mother's womb. So that happens at about 6 weeks. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy surrounding this law. There's already been lawsuits filed. There's already been a request for an injunction to the United States Supreme Court, which was turned down on a 5-4 decision. Um, so basically, my understanding of the law, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it prevents an abortion after a fetal heartbeat is able to be detected. So after a separate heartbeat is able to be detected, then the abortion would no longer be allowed. And now the enforcement mechanism is what makes it interesting. It allows a private citizen to sue, I guess, the abortion provider or anybody that aids the abortion provider in providing that abortion for up to $10,000. It
Yep.
doesn't really provide, as I read the law, it doesn't really provide a mandated state enforcement mechanism.
No, it really doesn't, which is what I think is, part of the challenge that's going to come before the court. Obviously, we know that the Justice Department is filing on behalf of the United States to try to sue Texas over this law as well. But, the enforcement mechanism, I think, is really where this law is probably most susceptible, whether you want it or not. When you talk about a private citizen having the opportunity to establish what we would call, to have standing, right? So when we talk about standing in a lawsuit, you and I both know we've had a lot of complexity and a lot of litigation over these types of things. Most people can't sue somebody else who doesn't have some type of direct correlation over an abortion. Just it's never existed. So the uniqueness of this law is that it actually grants individuals standing to sue over those types of activities. And so, a lot of people have said, well, what's the enforcement mechanism? Is it going to be police officers out there saying, oh, now you can go ahead and sue that person? Are they going out and getting injunctive relief? This is really money damages. And unfortunately, in the state of Texas, you and I both know money damages a lot of times doesn't really equate to a whole lot. Most people are pretty secure in Texas as far as like personal suit, but it does definitely open a window where somebody could come in and say, I know this happened. I know that you helped, you transported. And so I want to be able to sue you over this instance. I think it's really specifically targeted towards the other person involved in that relationship. So like why I say that is, yeah, you're a boyfriend, you didn't know what's going on, someone goes out and has an abortion, you find out here's who people aided and abetted or assisted or however you want to state that, then I have an avenue to be able to come in and kind of like assert my
It
claim.
seems to me that like 5 people can't all sue the same doctor for $10,000 over the same abortion. It appears to me in my reading of it that you can sue um, one time, or you can sue multiple people can sue the same doctor for the same abortion,
Right.
but you can only collect one $10,000
Judgment.
damage
Yeah.
judgment. So you could have
Yeah.
100 people suing the same person, and all 100 people would have to split $10,000, as I understand it. And as I also understand it, there's nothing in the law that allows a person to sue the mother who's actually going to get the abortion. It really is purely on the provider and someone who knowingly, that's I think specific in the statute, knowingly assisting in that procedure.
Sure. And the challenge, I mean, that, I think a lot of what is drawn so much criticism, obviously, this has always been contested since the 70s of Roe v. Wade, but it's really about the 6-week time frame as well, because,
Right.
most people don't even find out that they're pregnant until substantially after that time period. So, when people say this effectively, bans abortions, that's what they mean by that. They mean that, by the
Exactly.
time you would even have an indication that you could be pregnant, it's too late to be able to go and have an abortion.
And
Um,
I know there's mixed opinion on that. I mean, I think some of that, if you're engaging in the activity that could reasonably produce a baby, maybe some
I think
personal
that's how it happens.
responsibility is maybe some personal responsibility is due at that point, to see if you're, maybe you need to pee on a stick at 4 weeks as opposed to, later to figure it out. I mean, I don't know, but I know that's a big excuse that people are throwing out there. Well, most people don't know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. Well, if you're engaging in the activity and you have the least bit of personal responsibility, maybe you should, um, this is
Nope.
coming from the evil man, right? A man's not allowed to have an opinion on an abortion, apparently, even though all men decided the Roe v. Wade case, but whatever, we won't get into that. But, me to my personal opinion, I mean, I mean, I think the law is simple. If it has a heartbeat, you can't kill it. I mean,
Right.
I think that I think they're trying to do a lot of things to make it constitutional. I think I think, in my personal opinion, I think the heart's in the right place. I don't know if this law will pass muster, um, at the end of the day. But I do think medical science has come a long way since 1973's Roe v. Wade decision and the 1990 Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision.
Yep.
So medical science has come a long way in that amount of time. So I do think there needs to be at least another look at this, with respect to this, this unborn life that we're talking about here,
Well, and I
regardless
think
of how you come down on it.
yeah, I think the other challenge really that, a lot of people are taking issue with is there's not exceptions, right? So, one of the chief kind of, I guess, statements that the governor made, Governor Abbott, about this particular law was, he was questioned on rape, incest, no exception. And his response was, don't worry, we're going to eliminate rape from, the
Which is
state of
silly.
Texas. It was silly. And the unfortunate thing is like, no matter the intent, I agree with you. I think that there are a lot of people who are looking at this law and thinking like there's this evil mechanism behind trying to save these babies. Yeah, I don't really think it's that. I think that that's the challenge that we have, and we want to overlook the potential positive things that can come from a law like this, as far as accountability. When we immediately jump to asinine kind of statements that you're kind of like, well, that doesn't really fit. I would love to say that he eliminates rape from the state.
Right.
That'd be
Right.
fantastic. I think we'd have a lot of people feel pretty secure. How
Sure.
realistic is that? Who the hell knows? If he's going to try it, great. But I do think that that's really, these two avenues that we're talking about are challenges that the governor is going to face, the courts are going to face. How do you,
Well,
how much are you going to grant people standing to sue, which is novel? And then on top of that, how are you not going to grant any type of exception? These are the kinds of things that I think courts have wrestled with, and that it kind of gives this law more susceptibility than I think potentially it might need.
Here's my concern. I always hear the rape and incest exceptions, and look, I 100% agree that there should be a rape and incest um, exception in there, because I mean, you should not force someone who's been the victim of sexual assault and who's pregnant as a result of that sexual assault should never be forced to carry a baby to term. The emotional, you know, the emotional scars and trauma of that, and of that rape, number one, and then of having to carry the rapist child to term. I can't even imagine, honestly.
Mhm.
It's too horrible to be imagined. The problem I have with it is, okay, you have, on the one side, you have abortion should be legal all the way up and until birth. In some states, there's partial birth abortions. You can induce labor, and it's legal to abort. At that point, at some point you're talking about a human life. Um, and then you have the other side of it saying that, oh well, life begins at conception. So this Texas law, I think, is trying to be a bridge in the middle with, okay, we'll grant you that, you know, that fertilization, is not, conception is not necessarily when life is created, although obviously there's a lot of arguments to that. But this Texas law is designed to be a bridge in between those two extremes, right? No abortion at all versus abortion up to and including, birth. So you've got this 6 weeks heartbeat law that's designed to probably be kind of a meeting in the middle. The problem I have with the rape and incest, everyone talks about exceptions for rape and incest. Well, okay, you talk to the pro-choice person, you say, okay, well, are you going to be against abortion in all other circumstances if you allow for rape and incest? And the majority of the time the answer is no. I'm not going to be against abortion at all and under any circumstances. Okay, well, then that's a red herring. So yes, I
Mm.
do think there should, while I do think there should be, rape and incest exceptions, I do think that that's kind of a red herring in the argument, because we have an argument on one side with everything up to birth, inducing labor to abort is okay, and then letting the child die after it's born, on the one hand, versus, no abortions at all, even at the moment of shortly after conception, on the other hand. So I think this Texas law is designed to be at least some sort of a, I don't want to call it a compromise, but a bridge in between those two viewpoints. I mean, you can argue whether or not that's too close or too far from either spectrum, but um, you know, there's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that it is, it was an attempt to try to find some ground that both people could, both sides could kind of maybe live with. The unfortunate thing, this is one of those topics legally that has resulted in like polar opposites, right? It either exists or it doesn't. It's like no camp in the middle where it can like exist in a happy plane where only these minimal exceptions are, but they're okay to everybody else because it's still protecting the majority of life. It's like it's all or nothing on either side. And the unfortunate thing is about this law is I think that the way courts have examined abortion laws in the past is really that way, all or nothing, right? They don't really, it's been very difficult for them to draw a medical or scientific bright line that says, well, this seems acceptable. And, with the conservative court, I feel like this is probably, I can see why everybody's taking their chance now because,
Sure.
I think the injunctive relief that was pled for, everybody made a big deal out of that. But I think they were just saying, hey, no, we haven't, this is premature. We understand why you want it, but let's let it work its way through the courts and see if it resolves itself before it even gets to us, which I think is really smart on the court itself, because a lot of times they jump in too early and then it really inspires additional, not only litigation, but legislation. And so I think they're really kind of taking a wait and see, let's let it work its way through. When it gets to us, we'll deal with it when we have to.
I mean, and one of the other issues I have with it is, okay, you're going to allow someone to sue someone for some third party's abortion that they had. And I get that there's a possible public good or public, interest there. But how are you going to get access to someone's protected medical records to prove that they had this abortion? I mean, there's HIPAA violations out the yin yang. If you're talking, you'd have
Mhm.
to go get a court order allowing you to get this third person's medical records in order to prove that the abortion actually took place, unless that person is willing to, turn over those records and provide them to you and tell you what happened.
Oh, I
So
agree. And not only, yeah, and there's layers. It takes it so far out in layers. Like, so let's say you did want to see somebody over, hey, their best friend transported them to have an abortion after the heartbeat was detected, and you want to sue the friend. I think like in this situation, it's going to be very interesting to see if it makes it, because obviously the good news is, I think, effectively abortion stopped in the state of Texas for right now till everything figures it out. Like providers are kind of going out there going like, hey, this is the rule. We're not gonna, do anything until it works its way out. So I do think that it's going to be up to the legal community to really try to finally use whatever scientific methodology and insights that we can to create a positive line to help resolve this. Because I'll be honest with you, we litigate this case, it goes, I guarantee you, if you looked across the country, there have to probably be thousands upon thousands of cases pending before lower courts, appellate courts, and Supreme Courts. That doesn't even count the federal courts. So everybody in this country has tested it one way or another, either negatively or positively, restrictively, or opening it up. And so if we could ever figure out something legally to really kind of address this issue in a law, I think it would really be a positive thing as far as for overall litigation and individuals in this
let's
country.
let's talk about the real world application of this. I mean, put your lawyer hat on for a second. Do you honestly think that there's really going to be a court in Texas that's going to take a look at a case like this and decide it based on the merits of the particular case, rather than injecting the whatever party the judge belongs to, or whatever, city or prevailing political attitude of the area is going to decide that case? Do you think it's going to be a case where I'm going to be a judge and I'm going to dismiss any case that comes before me because I'm staunchly pro-choice? I'm going to dismiss any case that comes before me where someone's trying to sue an abortion provider or find some reason to get rid of it. Or if I'm staunchly pro-life, am I going to allow all of these cases to run, roughshod in the court and then have potentially thousands of cases involving, abortion providers?
Yeah. I think the bigger challenge is, I'll take a step back from that. I think it's going to be really challenging to find a lawyer to prosecute a case like this. I think, regardless of what our personal beliefs are, somebody's really going to have to,
I think
because
the
like, I
statute
think
does
in these,
allow for attorney's fees to be awarded.
it does. And but in that, I think, the concern that I would think in that situation is recovering those fees, recovering the funds that you're awarded. I think most lawyers are going to look at a situation like this and be like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to jump into that fray. So then you take it to a step further. Let's say you did find somebody who's like, hey, you know what, I'm willing to, who knows, maybe I'll collect my fees no matter what. I'm going to be in the news, and all press is good press, and so I'll take this case, and they decide to prosecute it. I agree with you 100%. I think judges are going to be disinclined to want to hear this kind of litigation unless they absolutely have to. And then when they have to, I absolutely agree with you. The realist in me says, hey, whatever your personal politics are is the way you're going to rule. There's broad discretion in what you say or what you do, and and the application of the law in this instance. So I definitely would think you better know your audience.
Is this something that goes in front of a jury? I don't know for sure if this is even a jury question, as this is something that could be allowed in front of a jury, number one. And number two, I guess my big problem as a lawyer taking a case like this would be, how do I prove that this occurred? How do I prove that the act occurred? I mean, I still think it's a massive hurdle to get over, to get those medical records to prove that an actual abortion, a post 6 weeks abortion took place. Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, and and you look at that, as you go through the question of a jury. Obviously, in Texas, not all states are this way. So if you're listening to it from another state or country, in Texas, most issues can be presented to a jury in a limited fashion, but it usually revolves around questions of fact. So a jury can consider questions of fact, but questions of law
but
are always presented to the judge.
If you can't prove that the abortion took place, you're never going to get to a jury.
Right.
The judge is gonna toss it before it gets to a jury on a summary judgment.
Yeah. So I think that's where a lot of this litigation will probably terminate itself.
I get the intent of the law is designed to take the state out of it, so it's not a state actor. It's also designed to discourage abortion procedures. That's really, I mean, let's call a spade, right? It's designed to discourage abortions. But whether actually, I would really be shocked to see if somebody's going to actually collect the images and win a case like this. I mean, I'd be surprised. It definitely would make history, I think.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And not only that, like history, like you'd be, it'd be all over the media. You'd be doing interviews left and right just because people would want to like talk to the person who was actually prosecuting this case and successfully. No, I agree with you, Brian. I think that, we're early on. The law as drafted, I think, has some problems. And you and I both know that, if it's got problems, and the courts usually are going to ferret those out. Now, does that mean that it, gets overturned in part and sustained in part? Is it all overturned? Do they come back and, revise it and try to re-implement it? These are things that are still in our future.
I mean, I do think they should have added a rape or incest provision in there. That just seems sensible if you're trying to make a sensible law on this thing. I understand the pro-choice and the pro-life arguments on both sides of this thing. But it seems to me that if you're trying to make a sensible law about it, you would have to include a rape or incest, protection in there.
Yeah, I mean, these are just things that it's not the victim's fault. And,
Right.
If you're, especially, let's just take it into the extremes. Obviously, you're a minor, you're 16,
Right.
This is the person, it's incest, you've been raped at home, and they're not going to take you to the doctor and let you find out. Do you know what I'm saying? So like at that point, what happens,
Right.
And so these are things that, but that's the challenge of drafting these kinds of laws. Every law that you and I both know, our code book, we have a family law code book, we have a court of civil code book. They're gigantic. And they're constantly being updated and revised and amended to address just the nuances of drafting. So take that in laws that have been in existence with case law supporting them for years, decades. Now you're talking about something that's just now hitting the books and what it's going to be. So I guarantee you, legal scholars are picking every word apart to see kind of what's acceptable and what's not.
Okay, let's move on because it is. I mean, we'll tie this together later, but this is kind of tied to, to this kind of bodily kind of integrity argument, my body, my choice argument, is the vaccine mandate that was just handed down yesterday by
Law don't
our
go around here, law dog. Law does
our
not go
illustrious
around here,
leader.
law dog.
So the illustrious leader mandated yesterday through executive order that all companies that have 100 or more employees are required to have their employees vaccinated, or the employees are required to be vaccinated or have a COVID test once a week. All federal employees, with the exception of postal workers, have to be vaccinated by a date certain, and all persons in the military have to be vaccinated. I don't
Yep.
think there's any exception to that. I don't think there's even a testing exception
No,
to
I
the
don't think
federal
so. No.
employees.
Yeah.
So, which leads me to the big question is, can the state mandate vaccinations? And I did some research on this topic, and it's interesting. There's kind of I looked at this guy's article. He wrote an article for MSN. This guy named Nicholas Tampio, I think is his name, and I hope I didn't pronounce that. Hope I didn't mispronounce his name, but it was a very good It was a very good kind of synopsis of the kind of, you kind of have pre-civil rights era cases and you have post-civil rights era cases. So just to give you a little bit of a history lesson, Sam, I don't know if you want one or not.
Always
but,
a student of yours, Brian. Always your student.
But this gentleman's a political science professor in let me find it, at Fordham University in New York. So he kind of wrote an article about vaccine mandates, and this is a recent article. Like, it was put out in August. Um, so um, there's two big cases that the court could or that they think that the Biden administration is going to kind of rely on to enforce these kind of vaccine mandates. One of them is the Jacobson versus Massachusetts case in 1905, and then another one is the Buck versus Bell case, which was in 1927. So the and these were, like I said, these were pre-1960s era civil rights litigation. So basically, there was the Jacobson case, which is the case that's most heavily cited for this, is a 1905 case. And basically, there was a smallpox outbreak in the Northeast, and they were forcing everyone to get smallpox vaccinations. And basically, if you didn't get a smallpox vaccination, it was a $5 fine, and if you didn't pay the fine, you went to jail. So this guy who was a pastor challenged the law because I guess he said he was having side effects from, it could potentially make him sick or something of that nature, and challenged the law, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, no, the state can mandate a vaccination, can mandate that you have a vaccination. Now, the difference between that and, I guess, so the state didn't say you have to be vaccinated. The Supreme Court specifically says the state can fine someone for not getting a vaccination. So there's a little bit, they're not forcing you to get a jab in your arm, or being forced into medical treatment that you don't want. So the state said, but they did say the state has an interest in the public health to mandate people to get a vaccination or face a fine in this particular instance. And like I said, if you didn't pay the fine, you went to jail. And the fine was $5, so it was the equivalent of about $150 today. So it was not a big fine. Second case, which is amazing to me, actually, was the Buck versus Bell case, and it was a case involving they call it the feeble-minded. So basically, it was a case involving forced sterilization of basically a mentally challenged person. And this case was decided in 1927, and the court citing that Jacobson case said that the court could mandate a forced sterilization in the interest of the public health, which was absolutely shocking to me. But that's 1927. That's 1927, right? So here we are, fast forward to the 60s, we have a whole litany of cases in the civil rights era dealing with kind of bodily integrity. So you have the beginning in 1965, there was a Griswold versus Connecticut case involving, state trying to prevent people from using contraceptives. Obviously, that was decided that you can obviously use contraceptives. The Loving versus Virginia case, which is a 1967 case, which allows for being able to marry regardless of race, so you can marry outside of your race. That didn't occur until 1967, surprisingly. The Roe v. Wade case in 1973 obviously allowed first trimester abortions. There is a 1987 case called, and it gets more and more interesting as we go along. So the 1987 case was the, hold on, U.S. versus Stanley, and it basically says you're not you cannot be forced. The state cannot force you to have medical treatment without your consent. And then the next case after this was the U.S. versus, or I'm sorry, was Cruzon versus Director of Missouri Department of Health, which talks about you being able to refuse treatment even if it's in your best interest. So what you can see is kind of with the, and then the next couple of cases with the Lawrence v. Texas case, which allows you to have any kind of sexual relations with another person that you choose to have, and then of course the Obergefell case, which deals with same-sex marriage. So there was obviously this push, in the civil rights era towards bodily integrity. They call it kind of more of a bodily integrity era, as opposed to what the old law was, which was obviously pre-civil rights era, which was up to and including the state forcing sterilization. So now we have vaccine mandates. So I don't know that the government can use the Jacobson case on a vaccine mandate because, number one, it was a state law passed by I believe, the Massachusetts state legislature or state assembly, whatever it's called in Massachusetts, enforcing that law. And the Supreme Court basically said that state or local governments can enact measures that are in the public good for their state or their local area. Now, we're talking about a sweeping vaccination mandate on private companies that's nationwide, right? So, let's cuss and discuss.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the court's history. Obviously, this is an executive mandate, so it hasn't passed the legislature federally. And the challenge is, you're talking about the three branches of government, right? Courts, legislature, the executive branch, and how they overlap. And so an executive mandate, these powers have really kind of, in my opinion, gone a little crazy ever since really, George Bush II. He really kind of took the mandates, opened Pandora's box. Obama ran with it, and it's been like doubling down ever since. So the challenge that presents is he's kind of doing two parts. He's going to use this case to say, hey, look, it's the greater good argument, right?
Sure.
Do the needs of the many outweigh the rights of the few? And if you look at, I think, the challenge that he's going to have, and I think you and I both had this conversation in the past, but, what is this pandemic? How threatening is it to the overall public good? And I think that's going to weigh heavily along the courts. The courts have evolved to more of a personal defense, meaning that, hey, there's a sanctity of the body and an individual's right to protect it or not protect it. However, that counterbalance, that cantilever weight is society, right? They've already ruled in the past that, hey, you know what? States have the right to protect the overall societal population that exists, by passing certain laws. It's whether or not we're going to have states' rights versus federal rights. Because what the court has done, in my opinion, is typically looked at the states and said, if you want to do it, you have the right to do it. If you've got a foundation, a basis for a reason to do it, we're going to allow you to do it. However, there are certain exceptions. And I think this is going to be a really interesting battle as it kind of goes up and down the pipeline. because I don't think that the Supreme Court, especially the conservative court, is going to want to extend federal rights to this level. However, the challenge that they have is, the checks and balances between the court branch, the legal branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch, because there are certain inherent powers in an executive mandate, and one of them is in these kind of like times of war, times of exigent circumstances. And that's really where I think he's going to rely on, is to say, this is a pandemic, it's worldwide, it's killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. I have a basis to want to do this on a limited fashion. The problem is, this is another one of those Pandora boxes, in my opinion, that if the court decides to allow it to continue, it's really an unfettered check on the executive branch writing legislation without passing it through Congress, who are our elected officials as well, who are really, designated that power, the power to pass legislation that would affect the state. So, it's a complicated argument that's really going to go forward legally. That's going to be, well litigated for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the big concern is, can you mandate people to do something by executive fiat, the president basically using dictatorial powers to mandate people to do something? And look, I get that the president is the chief executive of the government and the commander in chief of the military. So if the president wants to mandate vaccines for the military, whether you agree with it or not, he has the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If the president wants to mandate vaccine for federal employees, he's the chief executive of all federal agencies. So the president can do that whether you agree with it or not. Now, I do find it strange that they exempted, 644,000 postal workers from this mandate. But
Post officers don't get sick, dude. They're rain, snow, sleet,
right,
hail.
COVID.
It's right,
They
COVID.
still deliver the mail. But I think the president does have the ability and the right to use his executive authority to mandate government employees get it. So whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with it or not, that's, I think, a right that the federal government has. Now, where I draw the line and the hill to die on is, I don't believe personally that the president can dictate a private company to force its employees to get a vaccination or face a $14,000 fine or whatever the fine is alleged to be if a privately owned company chooses not to follow a vaccine mandate. And that's going to be the challenge, and that's going to be the fight. Does that individual right trump the purported common good in this particular situation? And I think obviously there's going to be a debate on the science of this, debate on because I do think that there is a situation where the president could take that step if it was bad enough, if the pandemic was bad enough. I don't personally believe that COVID is bad enough to where the casualty rate is so high that it requires these types of government mandates. Now, is there a disease out there? If there was, say, for example, an Ebola outbreak or something like that, where half the people that get it die, or of course you have to take absolutely the extreme measures at that point. But this is you're talking about a virus that even the vast majority of the people that do get it don't die of it. I mean, it is serious, and it is something we have to take very seriously. And believe me, speaking from experience, you have to take it seriously. But at the same time, is it worth trampling all over everybody's individual rights to do it? That's the real question.
Well, and as far as private companies, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not like there's not a history of the federal government doing this. I mean, and the novel concept that they're actually going to go in using OSHA regulations to try to implement this on private companies, because every company that deals with things that are regulated by OSHA has to be compliant or face those fines. So, can they say this is a part of the integrity of, an OSHA regulation that we can implement on private companies? The side thing is where I have more of a problem as well, is that he's trying to do something that Congress is typically empowered to do, which is control the purse strings. He's basically saying no federal funds go to any contractor, any business doing business with the federal government if they're non-compliant. And these are the types of regulations that typically are going to come from Congress. So the challenge that I have with presidential fiats and mandates is that they're really circumventing the the legislative branch to do these things, because they know that it's unlikely that it would happen that way. And the courts historically, when they act as that check and balance between these two branches, have said, these are the inherent powers constitutionally for these two branches, and they should stay within their realm. But these fiats are very unique in relation to, just like you said, as commander in chief, he has a tremendous amount of power within the federal government, and this ancillary power to, once he's controlled kind of that environment, to effectuate kind of these millions of businesses that surround and kind of support the federal government. And so it is a tremendous amount of power. And, I feel like it's definitely something that, we need to kind of, I want Congress to be able to kind of really address that and decide through the courts, what are the limitations on those powers? Because I agree with you. I think it's very complicated to say a president has the power to tell every business you're going to do this by size.
And I don't think the speech yesterday helped. I don't think you should go out there telling, I'm going to get around the governors and I'm going to force you to do this. I've tried to be nice. I mean, that sounds like a dictator talking. I mean, unfortunately. And I think you're more likely to get compliance if you kind of explain the merits of something, as opposed to, trying to mandate it down somebody's throat. Um, now, um, I don't know a lot about OSHA. I don't practice in that area, but it's my understanding that in order for an OSHA regulation for something to be mandated in the workplace, OSHA has to prove that, and this is something for a court to decide most likely, that this is an immediate threat to the safety of the workplace, to the health or safety of the. In order to get this emergency ruling in place, they have to be able to prove that this is a threat to the, you know, safety of the workplace, which is COVID at that level to be a threat to the workplace. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I guess it's going to depend. Like, I think if we would have had this in front of a court before Delta, or maybe some of these variants that,
And who knows
scientifically
how
are
much more
proving.
serious it's going to get. I mean, it could get way
Yeah,
worse.
yeah. So I think that's the challenge. The scientific community is going to play a big part in this litigation, because I don't know that any of us really understand, COVID, how it's going to mutate, how it's going to affect us. I don't think it's ever going to shut us down like it shut us down in the past, but who the hell knows? I'm not a virologist. I don't really have, that foresight or that scientific background to be able to say it. And I know courts don't either. So they're going to rely on those individuals. But I do think that it is a very complex legal argument that presents itself constitutionally between the states, between the federal government branches. I mean, it's far reaching, its effect on these issues that seem very narrow, but they're not. They actually can very easily be expanded on.
I agree
by
with
either.
you I agree with you from the standpoint of, I think this opens a Pandora's box on what they can regulate, because you're talking about COVID, who, you're talking about, they've never done anything like this, mandating a flu vaccine, and potentially flu has, very, very similar characteristics, to COVID, and how it's transmitted, and the vaccines that are available, to try to prevent flu, and transmissibility is similar, and things like that. That's got a lot of similarities, and they don't mandate that sort of thing. But I agree with you. What is this from a governmental overreach? That's my biggest concern about this, is the governmental overreach. What is that going to extend to? What is the next, executive fiat going to look like? What are they going to take away at that point? You're talking about mandating something on 100 million people in the workforce, none of which work for the federal government, but you're talking
Law
about the
don't go
federal
around
government.
here, law dog. Law don't go around here, law
You're
dog.
talking about the federal government regulating that, and taking that down a peg without your elected representatives having any sort of say so in that matter, or your state representatives, or your federally elected representatives having any say so in that matter. That causes me great concern. I'm not necessarily opposed to public health. I'm not against vaccines by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's a lot of very, very good benefits to many, many vaccines, including this one. But I'm very much against government mandates that aren't necessarily the best option. I think there should have been probably several steps before we got to this point.
Well, look, not just this state, but this country, it's founded on individual personal liberties. This is something that's, inherent in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so these are very complicated civil rights issues, even though it seems like it's not innocuous by any stretch of the imagination, but it lulls the public into kind of this like, we're really just talking about vaccines, or do you get it, do you not? Or is it about a mask? No, these are much bigger personal liberty issues at stake, and it affects really the constitutionality. So the way the courts decide these issues really have very large implications for the law and how it transforms, because you've got to understand, our legal system, obviously, this, Brian, but like people who are listening, it's based on precedent, meaning that courts, when they decide something, the other courts build on that. It's like building blocks, building a stone wall.
Those cases, until we had the civil rights era, which was, obviously a massive change to the whole state of law. You had, this Jacobson case, then you had the Buck Bell case, which piggybacked on, there was another case between Jacobson and Buck Bell that also mandated a vaccine. So and they cited the case before. So like you're talking about legal precedent, you're talking about cases citing on old cases. Well, they did it then, it was okay then. This is not that much more of a reach. So this should be okay now. And then before too long, they're sterilizing people who are mentally handicapped. So,
Well, and look, it's that we always talk about judicial activism, and I don't know if our listeners haven't ever heard that term. It just basically means, sometimes judges want to legislate from the bench. It's I've heard this joke one time, is that like presidents, they want to be the legislature wants to be the courts, and the courts want to be the president. So everybody wants to assume these roles. And really the beauty of our Constitution, the beauty of our legal system, even though most people don't appreciate it, is this exact thing, that these roles, although defined, they do have some overlap. And that's really what we're talking about is, when one branch wants to overpower or overextend its rights, and then bear down on somebody else's duties, but these other branches' duties. So like everybody, it's kind of this constant, balance that we're trying to find, and this is definitely going to be one of those types of cases, one of these types of issues that'll be far-reaching.
Right, and then the right to bodily integrity is not necessarily absolute, but also the right to the right to the government to mandate everything about your body should not be absolute either. So
they're going to start mandating plastic surgery, brother.
So anyway, tying this back into obviously our divorce situation. Let's talk about this this TikTok video that I saw here. You want me to? Hopefully you'll be able to hear this. So let me just play this, and we can discuss it. If I have our
with no mask with my child. I don't know.
Here we go. Here we go. Can you hear that okay, Sam?
Holy shit. Holy shit. As a lot of you know, I have a 5-year-old son who is with his mother, my ex-wife, and her entire family 5 days a week while he goes to school in her district. Also, as many of you know, she and her family are all anti-vax, anti-mask. Guess what she admitted to while I was recording in my car on my property? I asked her point blank, "Are you COVID vaccinated?" She said no. I said, "Do you plan to be?" And she said, "Maybe, I don't know." She said, "Maybe, I don't know." I now have hard proof of her admitting she is not COVID vaccinated around my son and takes no precautions whatsoever. And I can subpoena video of her being in stores unvaccinated with no mask with my child. I don't know for sure, but I think this could really help my case.
Well, all right. Let's go over that for a second. Number one, I don't think putting a video out on TikTok about what your legal strategy is necessarily going to help your case, but that's just for openers. That is
Hey, dude,
absolutely the most
everything's on
ridiculous thing you
TikTok
can
now.
do. And two, do you really think that whether someone chooses to be vaccinated or not vaccinated is going to and have an impact on a custody case? I mean, obviously, when this pandemic first hit, there was a series of people trying to prevent the other person from having their visitation time with the child because of the COVID outbreak. But the Supreme Court and every district court and appeals court shot that down pretty darn quick.
Yep.
So what do you think about these vaccine mandates in custody cases?
Well, I do think that I've seen litigation in the past where, I tell clients all the time, going to court and fighting, it's like going back in time to high school. When you were in high school, I'm sure everybody who's listening was super popular. And maybe you know why you were popular, or maybe you don't. Or if you weren't popular, maybe you know why you weren't popular, or maybe you don't. But here's the deal, court is the same way. You walk into a courtroom, and sometimes, because there's so many shades of gray in the way a court has discretion to decide things, they can like you or not like you because you look like their uncle. They could hate you because you look like the last girlfriend that dumped them. Whatever it can be, the strangest things, because they're human beings in black robes. So while I don't think that this would necessarily be determinative, I do think that it could play a part in litigation as you go forward based on kind of the overall pattern of behavior a parent might have. So if you look at it and you say the judge is going to decide a case on a child's best interest, right? And best interest is this big, huge span of who the hell knows what, right? And so a judge can look at that and say, okay, maybe I don't care that you get a vaccine, maybe I do. But are you introducing your child into a dangerous situation? Because as an example, I give it to you, and it's not the same, but it's similar. Hey, you're over the age of 21 and you can drink legally. Absolutely true. Do judges like it when you have possession of your child and you're in a custody battle? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It doesn't matter how innocuous it is, the barbecue, if you're sitting there and everybody's tossing beers back and it just so happens somebody you don't know shows up, gets drunk, starts a fight, your kid's there, guess what? Holy crap, that's going to show up in your court case. And is it your fault? No. Can you drink legally? Yes. Does a judge maybe not like you because you took your child to a barbecue where people were getting sloshed watching a Cowboys game? Maybe, maybe not. And so while I don't think this is necessarily determinative on his TikTok video, I do think that what he's looking at potentially has some legs to walk around for a bit. Because if you say, hey, look, let's say your child is unvaccinated under the age of 12, you're unvaccinated, you get COVID, your child gets COVID and is ill, and heaven forbid, hospitalized. And then you're going to go to court and say, hey, you're going to have to answer, just as any other parent, when you go to court, you have to answer for what you do for and what you don't do for your children. And so I do think that this has the potential to make a judge potentially like you or not like you, depending on their politics or their personal stance on the issue. But
to me, honestly, this sounds like a guy trying to use anything that they can possibly use to say, Mom, you're bad. Yeah, this person I chose to have a child with is an awful person, and I need to have the children. That's what that screams to me, and that's I guess maybe my experience talking a little bit. I think it's one thing if you let your child run up and down the COVID ward in the hospital, without a mask on and without a vaccination, that's one thing. I think you choosing not to be vaccinated and taking your child to Target, is quite another. I mean, if you look at the statistics of children that are dying of COVID, it's more children in the city of Chicago have been shot this year than have died nationwide of COVID. So it's not a high risk for children. It's a risk, don't get me wrong, just like everything else. If the flu's a risk, COVID's a risk. There's lots of risks for children out there. Is that going to be what wins you your custody case? I don't think recording the parent saying they're not vaccinated and they take your child to Walmart or Target and there's unvaccinated people walking around and you don't mask is going to be what gets you over the top in your custody case. Now, granted, could it be a factor? I guess it could be a factor, but I mean, they're going to be yanking a lot of kids out of homes if the sole determining factor is whether or not. I mean, honestly, in that situation, if it was so bad, if this is so bad, shouldn't that father be calling Child Protective Services and saying this parent's putting this child in a potentially deadly situation by exposing this child to a deadly illness? That's not what he's claiming. He's just claiming that she's an unfit parent because she chooses not to have a vaccine. So, and there can
Yeah,
be a number of reasons why, I'm assuming, one of which could be potentially a religious reason. I don't, there are a lot of people that have religious beliefs that are counterintuitive to certain types of medical treatment, or a personal problem with it, or whatever, or maybe they've already had it and they feel like they have, decent natural immunity, whatever. I don't know.
yeah, I agree with you. I don't think in and of itself it's anything that's going to win the day, but I do think that what I try to tell people is going to court, fighting about kids. It's like painting a picture, right? So it's never going to be the single brushstroke that's going to finish the painting or make you win or lose. It's really the overall portrait that you paint for the court. And so if this is a part of a neglectful parent, a parent who makes piss poor decisions, then yeah, you
It better be
probably
reason
can.
75 and not reason one.
Yeah, but I do think that what I will always tell clients is know your audience, right? So if this judge has, this bee in their bonnet, then, take your swing. But if it's something that most judges who have listened to a gazillion of they're horrible, she's horrible, they do this, they don't do that, it really has to be something substantial and imminent threat to a child to really kind of have some meat and potatoes to your soup
I
to
mean,
get you any kind of relief.
if you've got all of these things, and if you've got all of these things, there's alcohol use, potential domestic violence, and there's the child's unkept, the mom doesn't pay the rent, the electricity gets cut off in the winter, and all this stuff's going on. Mom doesn't make the kids go to school. Then on top of that, she doesn't take care to make sure that they're not at risk of COVID. I think there you've got your case. I think if this is reason number one, I think you've got a long uphill slog, and it probably has the potential to backfire on you, because
Well, I think it
stuff
would
like this
change if
can
it.
backfire.
Yeah, I think that where it would change, like potentially maybe his argument might have some merit is if you're in a hot spot, right? So like you're in a community, you've got 80% of the community is ill, the hospitals are overrun. You know what I'm saying? Then okay, maybe then you have a shot to use something like
Or
this. But if it's
or
yeah,
your
if
child has
everybody's
a
doing
lung,
okay,
say she has a
yeah,
lung condition, is
asthma,
particularly
yeah,
susceptible
it's
to
diabetes,
problems. Yeah, some sort of comorbidity that could really cause this child to have a
agreed,
significant reaction. If that absolutely is an extenuating
yeah,
circumstance. But a
yeah,
normal run of the mill kid, I think you probably better come a little stronger to the table
yeah.
with a
No,
little
I
something
agree.
more than
I mean,
that.
I think you're going to be a swinging whiff, but you know.
But I thought it's interesting because that's what I guess you can find anything out there on TikTok these days. So I really
That's
hope
where we're going to
that's
be
not
getting our
the
news is TikTok, man.
I really hope that's not the crux of that gentleman's case, because if it is, then he better go back to the drawing board. So,
Yeah. Yep.
all right. So good discussion today. I think we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. Hope it was interesting. How do we get in touch with Sam? Where are you located, and how do we get in touch if somebody wants to talk to
Yeah.
you?
So if you need me, you can get a hold of me. I'm in the Dallas Fort Worth area. You can reach me obviously by our website at www.astxlegal.com. You can also reach us at the office at 469-844-7181. And you reach me by email at ssanchez@astxlegal.com. We're also in Miami. So if you're ever down there and need our help, then give us a call.
And I'm in the Houston Woodlands area. You can reach me. Office number is 281-374-4741, or B Abercrombie at astxlegal.com. Our website, as always, is www.astxlegal.com. We can be reached there. And hope you like what you heard. Please comment. We always like the comments. We always like the questions. So please comment if you've got a question or concern, or something you want us to discuss. Happy to do it. And I thank you for the time today, Sam, and we will talk soon.
Talk to you good, brother.